The diplomatic pouch arrived at the embassy with proper seals and documentation, protected by international law from inspection or detention. The diplomatic courier carried credentials recognized by every nation. The shipment would pass through customs without examination, but a customs official noticed something unusual. The diplomatic pouch was unusually heavy for documents. The courier seemed nervous despite immunity from questioning, and the embassy had no apparent need for such frequent deliveries. This is the story of how a criminal network corrupted diplomatic systems to smuggle weapons across international borders, how they exploited diplomatic immunity to move military hardware that armed conflicts, enabled terrorism, and fueled violence across 4 continents, and how they operated for 6 years, moving $2 billion in illegal weapons before someone realized the diplomatic system itself had been weaponized. The network had corrupted officials in 32 countries. They had established false diplomatic missions specific for smuggling, and they were supplying weapons to 17 active conflict zones and 12 terrorist organizations, until the secret elite decided that diplomatic privilege would no longer shield weapons trafficking, or I won our eye. The diplomatic deception. The Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations grants extraordinary protections to diplomatic personnel and materials. Diplomatic bags cannot be opened or detained. Diplomatic couriers cannot be arrested or searched. Embassy grounds are inviolable. These protections exist to ensure governments can communicate internationally without interference. But these same protections create an opportunity for abuse. A diplomatic pouch can contain anything, and no one can legally inspect it. A diplomatic courier can carry anything, and no one can legally search them. The criminal network had recognized this vulnerability 6 years ago. They identified a simple but devastating exploitation: create false diplomatic missions and use diplomatic immunity to smuggle weapons. The scheme required 3 elements. First, corrupt officials in countries willing to grant diplomatic credentials for bribes. Second, establish fake diplomatic missions, small offices with minimal legitimate activity but full diplomatic protection. Third, recruit couriers willing to transport weapons under diplomatic cover. Over 6 years, the network expanded dramatically. They corrupted officials in 32 countries to grant diplomatic credentials. They established 47 fake diplomatic missions, offices appearing to be legitimate consulates but existing solely for weapon smuggling. They recruited 138 diplomatic couriers who transported weapons while protected by immunity. The scale became staggering. An estimated $2 billion in weapons moved through the network over 6 years. Military rifles, handguns, ammunition, explosives, rocket-propelled grenades, anti-aircraft missiles, hardware that would be strictly controlled in legitimate trade, but moved freely under diplomatic cover. The weapons supplied 17 active conflict zones across Africa, Middle East, Asia, and South America. They armed insurgent groups, terrorist organizations, criminal cartels, and militant factions. The network didn't care about politics or ideology. They sold to anyone who could pay. The network also supplied 12 designated terrorist organizations. Groups responsible for attacks killing thousands were armed through a system exploiting diplomatic protections. Weapons used in bombings, assassinations, and armed assaults had traveled internationally in diplomatic pouches that customs officials couldn't legally inspect. The operational structure was sophisticated. Network's leadership consisted of 19 individuals operating from locations with weak enforcement or corrupt protection. These leaders coordinated procurement from suppliers, arranged diplomatic credentials through corrupted officials, managed fake diplomatic missions, and distributed weapons to buyers. Procurement teams identified sources: corrupt military officials willing to sell from stockpiles, defense contractors with poor inventory controls, post-conflict zones where weapons were abundant. They purchased hardware at prices far below market value from sources that didn't ask questions. The corrupted officials who granted diplomatic credentials received substantial payments. A diplomatic passport enabling unlimited smuggling for 1 year cost between $50,000 and $200,000 depending on country and official. These officials provided credentials appearing completely legitimate. The fake diplomatic missions were established in strategic locations along major smuggling routes. Each mission had minimal legitimate staff maintaining appearance of normal diplomatic activity. But facilities served as waypoints where weapons could be received via diplomatic pouch, stored under diplomatic immunity, and redistributed to final destinations. The diplomatic couriers knew they were smuggling, but their diplomatic immunity meant they faced essentially zero risk of arrest or prosecution. Each courier received between $10,000 and $50,000 per trip. Over 6 years, the network had perfected a system making weapons trafficking nearly impossible to stop through traditional means. You couldn't inspect diplomatic pouches, couldn't search diplomatic couriers, couldn't raid diplomatic missions. The system created by international law to protect legitimate diplomatic activity had been corrupted into a global weapons pipeline. But the customs official who noticed something unusual had started an investigation that would expose the entire network. What? The investigation that exposed corruption. The customs official couldn't legally examine the diplomatic pouch that seemed suspicious, but he could report his observations. The unusually heavy shipment supposedly containing documents, the nervous courier. The embassy with no apparent legitimate need for frequent deliveries. His report reached an intelligence analyst specializing in weapons trafficking. She began examining diplomatic shipment patterns to and from the embassy the customs official had flagged. The embassy received diplomatic pouches at a rate far exceeding any legitimate need. A small trade mission with 3 staff was receiving diplomatic shipments 3 to 4 times per week. Volume unusual even for major embassies with hundreds of personnel. Surveillance revealed minimal legitimate diplomatic activity. Staff rarely attended official functions. They had few meetings with the local government or business. The office appeared to exist but not actually do anything a real diplomatic mission would do. Cross-referencing the embassy's diplomatic credentials with international databases revealed something unusual. The government had been issuing diplomatic credentials at a rate far exceeding its legitimate needs. The pattern suggested corruption. Officials were granting diplomatic status to individuals and missions that didn't serve legitimate governmental purposes. Investigation expanded to examine other diplomatic missions that might be similarly compromised. Analysis identified 46 additional missions showing similar anomalous patterns. The scale was stunning. 47 fake diplomatic missions. 138 individuals carrying diplomatic credentials with no legitimate diplomatic functions. Thousands of diplomatic shipments per year, not aligning with normal diplomatic activity. Surveillance operations targeted multiple fake missions simultaneously. In several cases, teams followed couriers from airports to diplomatic missions and observed weapons being removed from facilities and loaded into unmarked vehicles. The diplomatic missions were storing and distributing weapons, using diplomatic immunity as complete protection from law enforcement. Communications intercepts revealed discussions about shipments, routes, and deliveries. Financial analysis showed large payments flowing to officials in 32 countries, bribes for diplomatic credentials and protection. The intelligence picture revealed a global weapons smuggling network operating entirely under diplomatic cover. The investigation also identified weapons destinations. 17 active conflict zones receiving arms shipments. 12 designated terrorist organizations obtaining weapons through the network. Criminal cartels arming themselves via diplomatic channels. The assessment that reached the secret elite was clear. This network represented systemic abuse of diplomatic protections threatening international security. Dismantling it would require coordinated action across dozens of countries, sophisticated operations to overcome diplomatic immunity, and careful management to avoid diplomatic crises while stopping weapons trafficking. Authorization came within 1 week. The coordinated dismantling. The operation required simultaneously addressing multiple elements while navigating legal protections that made traditional enforcement impossible. 47 fake diplomatic missions across 32 countries. 138 diplomatic couriers. 19 leadership figures. Corrupted officials in multiple governments. And buyers waiting for weapons in conflict zones worldwide. Phase 1. Diplomatic revocation. Intelligence packages were prepared for governments of the 32 countries whose officials had been corrupted. The packages contained documented evidence of bribery, weapons trafficking, and abuse of diplomatic credentials. Response varied by country. Some governments immediately launched investigations and revoked credentials. Others required diplomatic pressure from multiple nations. A few required covert operations. Within 3 weeks, 29 of 32 countries had revoked diplomatic status of fake missions. The remaining 3 where corruption was more entrenched required different approaches. But even there, operations became increasingly difficult. Phase 2. Mission shutdowns. As diplomatic credentials were revoked, fake missions lost immunity from law enforcement. Without diplomatic protection, facilities became ordinary buildings that could be searched and seized. Coordinated raids occurred across 29 countries within a 72-hour window. Law enforcement executed search warrants on former diplomatic missions. The raids revealed exactly what surveillance had suggested. Weapons storage facilities disguised as diplomatic offices. Military hardware that had arrived via diplomatic pouch. Documentation of smuggling operations. Buyer contacts. Payment records. Raids seized over 4,000 weapons including military rifles, handguns, explosives, anti-aircraft missiles, and ammunition. Hardware that had been moving through diplomatic channels for years was finally stopped. Phase 3, Courier Apprehension. The 138 diplomatic couriers presented unique challenges. Many still held valid diplomatic credentials from countries that hadn't revoked them. The solution required careful coordination. As couriers traveled internationally, they were tracked through multiple jurisdictions. When couriers entered countries that had agreed to waive diplomatic immunity for trafficking cases, they were arrested. Other couriers had credentials revoked by home countries after being exposed as weapons traffickers. Once immunity removed, they were arrested through normal procedures. The most problematic couriers, those with immunity from countries that wouldn't revoke credentials, were handled through covert operations. These individuals were removed from circulation through means appearing to be criminal disputes, travel mishaps, or personal decisions to cease operations. Within 4 months, all 138 couriers had been detained, had credentials revoked, or been otherwise removed from the network. Phase 4, Leadership Targeting. The 19 individuals who led the network operated from locations where they believed corruption or weak enforcement provided protection. 7 leaders were arrested through coordinated law enforcement in countries that chose to cooperate. 6 leaders operated where corruption protected them. These were extracted through covert operations and transferred to jurisdictions that would prosecute. 4 leaders attempted flight, all intercepted through coordinated international alerts. 2 leaders were eliminated when they violently resisted extraction. Within 6 months, all 19 leaders had been killed, captured, or detained. Network's command structure completely destroyed. Phase 5, Financial Dismantling. The network had generated approximately $2 billion over 6 years. Those assets were traced and seized through coordinated regulatory actions. Bank accounts in 14 countries frozen. Shell companies exposed and dissolved. Properties purchased with trafficking proceeds seized. Over $370 million recovered through asset forfeiture. Funds redirected to programs combating weapons proliferation and supporting regions affected by conflicts the network had armed. The system that was reclaimed. The operational assessment documented the scope. 6 years exploiting diplomatic immunity to smuggle weapons. $2 billion in illegal arms trafficking. 47 fake diplomatic missions across 32 countries. 138 diplomatic couriers using immunity to transport weapons. 19 leadership figures. 17 conflict zones armed. 12 terrorist organizations supplied. All ended through coordinated operations that overcame diplomatic protections without violating international law. Fake missions had credentials revoked before being raided. Couriers had immunity removed before arrest. Leadership apprehended through means respecting diplomatic principles while ending criminal operations. The network's customers, conflict parties and terrorist organizations waiting for weapons shipments, found supply lines disrupted. Operations planned based on expected arms deliveries couldn't proceed. Attacks that would have been conducted with weapons from the network were prevented because weapons never arrived. Corrupted officials who had sold diplomatic credentials faced consequences ranging from prosecution to removal. System of oversight for diplomatic credential issuance was reformed in multiple countries. Diplomatic community implemented enhanced scrutiny of missions showing unusual operational patterns. International cooperation on preventing abuse of diplomatic privileges was strengthened. Protections making diplomacy possible were preserved, while exploitation was made more difficult. The immunity that ended. Secret Elite's operation demonstrated that diplomatic immunity, while legally protecting criminal activity, couldn't prevent systematic dismantling of networks abusing those protections. Network had exploited international law perfectly, but intelligence operations, diplomatic pressure, credential revocations, and covert actions had overcome every protection. The operation also revealed vulnerabilities in the international diplomatic system that had been exploited for years without detection. The ease with which corrupted officials could grant diplomatic credentials. The minimal oversight of fake diplomatic missions established purely for criminal purposes. The inability of customs and security services to inspect diplomatic shipments, even when suspicious. The gaps in international coordination that allowed abuse to continue across multiple countries. But the response to these vulnerabilities was equally significant. Governments implemented enhanced verification procedures for diplomatic credential issuance. International organizations established protocols for identifying and investigating suspicious diplomatic missions. Customs services developed improved risk assessment methods for diplomatic shipments that didn't violate diplomatic protections, but increased scrutiny of anomalous patterns. Intelligence sharing between nations was strengthened to identify systemic abuse earlier. The network that believed diplomatic immunity provided perfect protection learned that while individual shipments might be legally protected, systematic exploitation would eventually be identified and dismantled through coordinated international action that respected diplomatic law while ending criminal abuse. In files that don't officially exist, complete record remains. Investigation identifying 47 fake diplomatic missions exploiting immunity for weapons smuggling. Intelligence documenting $2 billion in illegal arms trafficking over 6 years. Coordination across 32 countries that revoked credentials, seized weapons, and apprehended traffickers. Prevention of weapons deliveries to 17 conflict zones and 12 terrorist organizations. And simple conclusion: diplomatic system corrupted for weapons trafficking. Immunity exploited for 6 years. $2 billion in illegal arms moved. Network identified, credentials revoked, missions raided, couriers apprehended, leadership eliminated, financial assets seized. Immunity ended. Trafficking stopped. Network believed diplomatic immunity made them untouchable. They exploited international law perfectly. They corrupted officials in 32 countries. They established 47 protected facilities. They moved $2 billion in weapons through systems designed to protect diplomatic activity. They armed conflicts and terrorism globally while operating under protections meant to enable peaceful international relations. They believed until coordinated operations across dozens of countries systematically dismantled every element. Until diplomatic credentials were revoked and immunity removed. Until fake missions were raided and weapons seized. Until couriers were arrested and leadership apprehended. Until the system they had corrupted was reclaimed and strengthened against future abuse. Diplomatic system corrupted for weapons trafficking was reclaimed. Immunity that protected smuggling was ended. Network that armed conflicts and terrorism was destroyed. And international cooperation demonstrated that even the strongest legal protections couldn't shield systematic criminal exploitation from being identified and eliminated. And somewhere in classified files, final notation: 6 years of diplomatic immunity abuse for weapons trafficking, 47 fake missions, 138 couriers, $2 billion in illegal arms, 17 conflict zones armed, 12 terrorist organizations supplied, network dismantled, credentials revoked, immunity ended, weapons seized, trafficking stopped, system reclaimed, protections strengthened.